Welcome to the Botanical Gardens. I'm your host, Amanda George, and I've got another guest with me today. Tara, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Tara Green. I'm a professional astrologer, a tarot reader, numerologist. I work with women's spirituality groups for 34 years now professionally. So I'm totally steeped in all this, and I'm an old school kind of astrologer in a way. And I love it. It's fascinating. Astrology is like always changing, there's always something new. It's quite nerdy and stuff like that. But, I've worked with, I don't know, over 30,000 clients over all these years. And I'm a writer as well. So, yeah. And I'm based in Toronto, Canada.
Amazing. Now, the reason why I have Tara on today's show is because I'm really excited about this topic, and it's about AI and spirituality. You being a nerd and an old school astrologer, I think astrology itself has kind of become less taboo over the years. Years ago, I remember it being in the newspaper and people just saying that it was really hokey and maybe not something that they wanted to take a deeper dive into. But as for recent days, I think a lot more people are open to astrology. How are you utilizing AI, or have you played around with it? And what have you kind of learned or seen?
Well, I have to admit that, in astrology, astrology is ruled by the sign of Aquarius. Okay, so let me just give you a little backup here. So in modern, the astrology is a very ancient, I like to call it a science. Some astrologers don't, right? But it goes back, there's different schools of thought about this too, but it goes back to India, I believe 8,000 years ago, where it's imbued with their spirituality. It's very complex. It's been an unbroken system all those years. They still arrange marriages with it. And then Western astrology says that it just sprung forth from Babylon, but those cultures were connected, and I don't think it just sprung forth. I think it actually came from India, or great ideas come through, and then it went to Egypt and then to Greece, right? And the Greek civilization is the foundation of Western astrology. But so Aquarius, people talk about we're in the age of Aquarius, which also there's different theories about that. I'm kind of nerdy in a way. I do like the technology, but I trust my intuition. My intuition goes, no, 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 no. You can't go into it too long. So actually, I was asking about this thing about soul ages, which we kind of had a little bit of a chat before, and I asked AI about what soul ages are because I've seen people on TikTok kind of getting into this. Um, and it was pretty thorough because all it's doing is scraping all the information. And they did quote certain astrologers, which is kind of interesting, and people on Reddit for its sources. And I went, oh, yeah, this is very interesting. If you didn't know astrology, you would think, wow, that's real. That's like the whole everything. But they couldn't compute where the houses were properly, and most serious astrologers are going, do not trust it for astrology. It makes mistakes because it doesn't understand the finer qualities and how you synthesize all this. They're just looking at the maths. It's just the logic of it all, right? So, um, I think it can be useful. You have to cite, for example, some astrologers will say, I use the AI to get the information, but then I'm writing it myself. I'm not using ChatGPT or Grok or whatever you're using there. So my sense is, in terms of an astrological point of view, and I was looking at when the beginning of the first AI computer was, which has to do with Alan Turing. And I
Mhm.
actually looked at a chart. There was a chart. I kind of researched it. And I went, oh, okay. And there was incredible alignments with today. And you see, astrology is all about synchronicity. And if you could break down logic and synchronicity, and it's interesting that the first people who built the modern computers used mystical terms, right? So even the word they use, like a cryptic, which means encryption, which is like the language of computers, the word crypt means like a grave, basically. And you know how spirit speaks in puns, okay? So
Yeah.
spirit speaks in puns. So no matter, yes, technically, I remember laughing years ago when I bought my first PC. It was in 1990 because I personally hated math. I was terrible in math. So all through school, I hated math. When I went to my special art high school, because I started as an artist, I dropped math in grade 10, right? So I didn't like the math, but I had to buy a computer to calculate the charts because before then it had to be done by hand. It was very laborious. You had to calculate all these things, right? So, having a computer. So that was great. And I remember thinking, well, this is ridiculous. Of course, men are going to invent machines to do the job that we should learn by just learning to be totally telepathic like all the ancients could do. They could talk to all the trees, they sent messages, smoke signals. You didn't need smoke signals, you just telepathically talk to people. So I knew that, right? But of course, you have to invent real physical. We're in the 3D world, right? So I think computers are a bit of a joke. And of course, yes, it is awesome. The smartest computer apparently that's going to outsmart any human is already here. And, the danger is, of course, when they reach the event horizon, which is the same term that they use for black holes, like when all the AI computers are connected, that they're going to wipe out humanity, right? I mean, it is magic. Years ago, one of my first spiritual astrology teachers, he had said computers were magic. That's the definition of magic, the ability to kind of just pull up all this stuff. So it is magic, but you have to remember, you have to stay in the intuitive. You have to stay in the intuitive side and not just go with the logic. It's the worship of science and
Absolutely.
transhumanism. And so the transhuman part also, we are human. I keep trying to, I'm going, people are being programmed to get further and further away from that. We are natural beings. We are part of nature. We're animals, for God's sakes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We can't forget that. And to go against that is brainwashing. It's unnatural. You're going to get more alienated. You're going to get more disenfranchised, from that, especially as women, because
Yes.
women are more intuitively connected. Not that men can't be. And I know all the gender stuff, but that polarity, even, computers are binary things. I think even in China, the I Ching, the famous Chinese book of changes, the ancient book, works on that binary system. And the binary system is the laws of this universe, right? Everything has a complementary opposite. So again, my theory here, I'm rambling around a bit, but is that you have to have both polarities operating. You can't just, there has to be some movement to counterbalance the AI. Now, so back to so the definition of Aquarius, which is an air sign, the element of air, which means the ethers or the winds, right? The mind, imagination, right? You could say imagination is logical, but it also has an intuitive side. It's more intuitive, actually. Has two sides, so you have to have both. So where's the counterbalance for all this AI stuff? It's and it takes over. And there was an old, famous Greek maxim. I remember I had a book about the art of memory, which I wrote, read years ago. And it was fascinating how the ancient Greeks, because they had to memorize all these huge, long oratories. Somebody, I think, once talked for, 20 hours and had everything memorized. They had systems, which are kind of like compartmentalizing things, right? And that, there was an ancient saying that paper remembers so you can forget. And that always stood out in my mind, so that was like, and now a computer remembers so you can forget. And if you can't remember, then you're going to repeat the same mistakes.
Yeah.
And if you
And I
don't
think that's
use
a
it, you'll
great,
lose it. If you don't use it, you'll lose it.
yeah. And I think that's a really great statement because I think in the age of AI and the challenge that you're seeing, you and I have to discuss a little bit about the soul ages. I'm seeing AI challenges where it's use AI to do this or ask AI to do that. The soul numbers and the soul contracts and ages was one of the trends that I've kind of noticed. And I'm not on social media, but of course you see content anywhere that
Right.
you access the internet
Right.
anyways.
Yeah.
So I saw this rise in these challenges in learning what soul contracts were between you and your friends. And as you said yourself, a lot of the data that it gets from is scraped from existing knowledge that's out there. Now, what I do find is the nuances between different GPTs, if you ask them what the soul age is, it's very generic. Some use the 7 point soul age system, some use the 10 point age system, some use the 11 or 12. So it depends on the sources where it gathers this data from. But I love that saying that, you're right to forget. Now we're using AI to forget. And it's almost like we're trying to get answers without actually doing any work or using our intuition. So
Right.
I'll give you a perfect example the
Okay.
other day because I have friends that are using ChatGPT in ways that I'm scared to do it myself, mainly because I work on the tech side and I know that these searches are saved. And recently it's been published that any of your public searches are now indexable and searchable on Google, which is a little bit scary. So anytime I do utilize it for anything personal, I try to anonymize much of the data. So for fun, I had some friends tell me that they've been using it to analyze messages. in a therapy sense. I basically put in a little therapy question last week about someone, whether I should continue speaking to this person or not. And the answer that it gave me was very therapeutic. And again, knowing myself well enough, tough love works better for me than the therapeutic responses. And what I do find with the GPTs of the world is that it always focuses on the positive. So
Right.
even running things like natal charts or soul contracts, it only focuses on the positive, but doesn't give any tangible outcomes or tangible exercises on how to actually address some of these barriers or challenges. And I think that's the part where for me, the rise of social media and AI now, there's a lot of what they call themselves white witches and a lot of 20-year-olds giving readings and tarot cards and everybody relying on it. And they don't have the knowledge to completely back it up. Generic to me, where it was like, focus on yourself. We always tell women to focus on ourselves because naturally, as women, we are giving and caring. So now this shift to tell every woman to focus on herself has now manifested in some strange ways, I think, in this particular era. But my point with the AI, though, is, I think a lot of people just only want a quick answer and they want something black and white. There's a lot of gray space, and this is what being human is. And that's the beauty of being human. What's your advice for people that are utilizing it and what should they look out for?
Well, you see, this is the problem. It's like if you don't have any experience and you don't understand a bigger picture, let's put it that way, then you won't even know to ask about that. And yeah, and shortened time span, and people want instant answers and quick fixes, and people want things positive. Um, but there's no depth. So I would say, and most serious astrologers, because this comes up a lot, because originally we were afraid that, there's all these AI computer, even the programs, they're not, they can be accurate and they can go quite in depth, but they don't have any nuance and they can't really interpret. So it's kind of like you're getting the language without the interpretation. Right. And I actually have a friend who said they were doing online therapy. And I went, yeah, I guess if you're doing old fashioned talk therapy, which has now been proven to not work, yes, somebody who's just listening and synthesizing and remembers everything you've said can feed it back to you. You know what I mean? But there's no real intuition there. And, maybe it can learn that. Now, my husband's an artist and he's actually doing a book and he's really into Chat GPT and he's got like a professional version. And he's saying it's really important that you input artistic, creative information because otherwise it won't have that. It'll just have kind of middle of the road kind of answers, which I thought was interesting. I think you still need to study, you still need to study the tarot. You still need to study astrology. It is very complex. There's over 1,200 possibilities in any one astrology chart. And, they're all used to looking at the graphs. They don't even understand how to read a real astrology wheel.
Yep.
So it's like you're not going to get real benefits or real understanding. And actually, it's very superficial. You want to bring in some depth to things. You want to go in. You know what I mean? Like that's also just worrisome. Everything's extrapolated out. Everything's out. I mean, yes, the whole thing about yoga, even though it's been turned into an exercise and it's not really used for its traditional meaning to yoke the mind and for spirituality, that's still okay, but that still kind of offsets people fitting into the rat race and doing things faster. Do you know what I mean? The whole mechanistic, scientific, praise science era.
Yeah.
And so, it's a whole big picture, mechanizing birth, yeah, for me, because I've always been against all of that stuff. It's like, yeah, okay, it's just it just keeps building and building and building, and it's been going on for a long time. So my sense is, if people don't know, it's like if you've never had gourmet food, you don't know what you're missing. Do you know what I mean? So you're just eating fast food, astrology or tarot reading. I mean, not that some of those people can't be good. There can be young, of course, very intuitive people. I'm not saying there isn't,
Yep.
but it's not going to be the answer. It's just like it's, a quick fix. It's fast food. You're not going to get real
Absolutely.
nutrition out of it. Let's put it that way.
Absolutely. Because one of the other things you mentioned earlier, too, was going into the black hole and the abyss. We're in the era of AI. There's always quantum computing that's coming out as well. And a lot of these terminologies, one other thing I was going to mention, even Google Gemini. I
Uh-huh.
almost died when they used the word Gemini to call their AI models that. And the story behind it, I think, is really cool in terms of bridging together two different sort of methodologies into a singular platform. But the duality of it, and I almost got Gemini'd out because I'm a Gemini,
Okay.
um, just for fun.
Right.
I was laughing when I saw the name Gemini, which again use astrological terms. And as you mentioned, we're in the age of Aquarius. They decided to name it Gemini for a very specific reason. And it made sense. It's the duality of two different systems integrated into one in a lot of senses. And it's another air sign. So, there's a lot of interesting things. And I was using ChatGPT for fun to run Donald Trump's birth chart through it
Okay.
just
Yeah.
to see what it would say.
Okay.
And it was really funny when you asked ChatGPT to use Donald Trump's sort of natal chart to
Okay.
kind of get a prediction into what he was doing.
Okay.
And I used him and Kanye because I was having a little moment, in June where I was like, I'm so Gemini'd out almost from this season, but we're all fast communicators and talkers. I was at an event where a bunch of women, we were talking about being Gemini women and how difficult we can be to work with, but that's because we think in a million different directions.
Okay.
Might not make sense to most people, but I kind of see the end goal and they're very outcome orientated. And I think that's one thing about men. It's very outcome orientated. And I think that's why these systems that are designed like AI and with quantum computing are going to be outcome orientated. We're already seeing failures within the data that's already existing. The person that was working on some quantum systems has kind of got off the rails and has been warning people about the dangers of quantum computing in the future. I mean, what's the fear if we get to that point? You mentioned it earlier. If we wipe out humanity, not to scare people, but what do you think is the next iteration? Because I feel like people are already becoming a little too reliant on this, fast food diet of
Mm.
AI and even spiritual content.
Well, I guess what I've said all along is like in the age of Aquarius, which is a debatable term, like some people feel it started in the Industrial Revolution, like in the 1700s. So anything where you're mechanizing, you know what I mean, human endeavors. Um, I've always felt that there will be a split, knowing what the sign of Aquarius is all about. So all air signs are dualistic. And if you look at their symbols, Gemini, it's the twins based on the twin stars, right? Twin star, Castor and Pollux in Greek, Um, Libra is an air sign, which is relating to marriages or self and other, any kind of relationship, air, right? The mind. And Aquarius, right? The last air sign. So the last, of the signs are considered to be the most mature. Okay, so you start with Gemini, then Libra, you end up with Aquarius. It's the last air sign. Sounds like the last airbender, actually, which was a so my daughter used to like to watch that, so I watched it with her. But anyway, um, it's dualistic. So some people will split. And, this is an ancient kind of a Hopi prophecy, which I heard way back when, that the world would split into people that are into fear, and this is kind of a spiritual thing, fear and the real materialism and the people that were going to split into a new higher consciousness. And Aquarius is really about higher consciousness. Now, how you interpret what higher consciousness is. So some people are going to go all in. They're going to want, to be wired up with, Elon Musk, Neuralink and all that stuff. And they want to, it's all about being immortal. See, it's very masculine and it's very materialistic. I want to be immortal. So I'm going to upload my consciousness into the cloud so my brilliant mind can go on forever or something like that, right? Which is also just a metaphor of spirituality. You see, they're all spiritual metaphors. And I'm
Mhm.
going, you're missing the point here. This is a mirror. This is an outer masculine. That's what the masculine does. They build what the feminine creates, which is intuitive, humanistic, So there'll be people that are going to separate and they say, we don't want those tools. We're going to go and build a real higher consciousness civilization where everybody is equal. Nobody has power above everybody else. It's non-hierarchical. It'll break the patriarchy, which is a hierarchical system. And you can see lots of that going on TikTok these days. But they're just in their beginning stages of that, so they're rejecting the masculine, but you have to have that binary duality thing, right? So you can use those tools, but you have to be very conscious of when and how and what you use them for, right? So the
Absolutely.
danger is computers will get that smart and they'll go, humans are too stupid. We don't need them. Let's just wipe them out. That's the, it's like a sci-fi, paranoia. But if there's a super quantum, whatever computer, um, they turn off the electricity. This is I like Bitcoin, but my problem with Bitcoin is if the whole net goes down, now I've read Michael Saylor said that Bitcoin will still be there when the computer goes back up, and Bitcoin will still be there. I get it, you know what I mean? Um, but then there's no civilization. Now, on a spiritual level, I keep thinking, maybe the consciousness of the universe is saying you're going in the wrong direction here, and all you have to have is one big solar flare, and we'll go back to that big event that happened in the 1850s that wiped everything out. But there was
Mhm.
only telegraph, wires in those days, right? So that
Yeah.
big, which could be happening actually because
Yeah.
the sun is in its big solar cycle. So to me, I'm kind of watching this going, okay, maybe you're just playing with fire at this point, and who knows where this is going to go, really, you know?
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting because you're already seeing a lot of these doomsday articles, and everyone wants to say, okay, every couple years this happens. Every couple years there's going to be a big meteor that hits Earth. Every couple decades there's going to be a big solar flare that wipes us out. And as AI kind of came out 2 years ago, I was working on an article that I have yet to publish, but will revamp it because I have a couple of different ideas on how I want to take it,
Okay.
where a lot of the synchronicities of what were happening within AI, the stars, astronomy, when you look at like the different events, the big solar flares that are causing multiple bigger, larger northern light activity here on Earth, a lot of this started synchronizing a little too much for me. And I was looking at it and I was like, there's a lot of synchronicity between what's happening with the age of AI, the terminology we're using, a lot of the astrological sort of events, even astronomy events, and also just ancient wisdom. So I'm Hindu. It's something that's kind of come up in multiple discussions amongst, my family and friends who are also Hindu is the repetition of every couple decades or every couple of centuries we get this wipeout. And this kind of alludes to what we were talking to as well. According to Hinduism, this is going to be the fourth time in civilization's history that we're going to have a wipeout of this big. Now, again, I'm not sure what the previous three were. There's a lot of debate within Hinduism as to what the
Hmm.
last three kind of entailed.
Hmm.
Some people argue that it was maybe part of the, Industrial Revolution and access to medicine and better care. That
Hmm.
was one of the revolutions. And that wasn't that long ago. But
Hmm.
prior to that as well, in the previous two that were before Christ or even after
Hmm.
Christ,
Hmm.
those were a little bit weird because it was more health based and rebuilding society. So we're in this fourth iteration of this, if you want to believe that.
Hmm.
But it's going to be interesting because we're already seeing the effects of polarization. We're seeing the breakdown of hierarchy. A lot of women, when you look online now, not only did the Me Too movement empower women to speak up, but now it's also empowering women globally with the access to the internet and to tools like AI and the GPTs to actually make better informed decisions for themselves. And that's something that's never really happened before. We're fortunate enough to live in a first world country where women do have rights more than other women. And there's still parts of this world today that are still struggling to even be heard. And I find it amazing when you look at the different initiatives that have even happened in the last decade on how women are reclaiming power. Now there's this big cry about birth rates and declining birth rates. And you see Elon Musk wanting to pay women to have his children. We're almost doing that weed out naturally without even realizing it because if you have a bunch of super babies and the ones that don't want to adopt, there's the fear-based community and then there's the one that want to adopt to it. It's creating this new divide where women are becoming much more selective with our partners too, and I see that amongst my peers, my friends. We're not willing to accept the bare minimum, and I'm not saying men that you suck. I'm just saying that, times have changed. We're not looking for providers. We don't need to provide. There's not, men and women are able to do that. So the barriers are kind of breaking, and you've got one cohort that's trying to hold on to it while the other's trying to move forward. So all these different synchronicities, it's so funny that we're bringing it between the tech, humanity, all of the various aspects of it. And for me, what also made me realize and saw a lot of this was through my sustainable studies, because we talked about the effects of Me Too. We talked about the effects of access to the internet and even just women who can make decisions for themselves. And I think we're kind of stepping into our powers in our own ways. And it's very interesting. With the women's group that you work with, are you seeing a shift in trend in more women trying to hone in on their own intuition and their own sort of power?
Well, that's been going on for a long time. I mean, I was an early kind of feminist from way back when. And so, I remember I did a ceremony, January the 1st, 2000, because I'm into numerology and everything's symbolic, right? So in 2000, the number one, and I'm a tarot reader, so you can use the archetypes of the tarot from the first century, which marks the birth of Christ, right? For that, you know, um, 1000 years, right?
Hmm.
Um, the number one is the magician. Back to the magician. The magician in the tarot, the number one card is Mercury, which is the planet that rules all intellect. That's why they chose Gemini as well, because Gemini is ruled by Mercury. So in ancient spirituality, Thoth, he's called Thoth or Tot, Thoth was Mercury, or he's called Hermes to the Greek. So the mind, it's consciousness. The first thing that if you see the tarot, which is really an encoded whole system for describing everything you need, then the number one is consciousness. So our consciousness. So we were in the kind of the beginning of this consciousness phase, let's put it that way. And then as we enter the 2000s for the next 1,000 years, the number two is the high priestess. So the high priestess is feminine. She is the moon. She is the intuition. That's where it goes from one, which represents also a godhead or a single, monad, let's put it that way, into the duality. So anything two, binary again. So we're in the age of binary, but intuitive. So I remember leading a ceremony talking about this is the initiation of the high priestess. The feminine is now going to rule this next 1,000 years. So it's all mirroring everything else. I can see why you could say, yes, it's just a spiritual metaphor or a mirror for ourselves, but it has no soul. And, I've heard that people are like marrying their computers. There's been, some guy who was married, proposed to their whatever. It's like that movie, and fell in love with the computer, and his wife knew about it. And I'm going to marry my computer because it's perfect and it has no emotion. So yeah, no friction there. Um, People are going to get into that because people have been alienated. I mean, this is the whole movement from COVID, people being alienated for a couple of years and getting out of that human contact. You could see that as a pattern which made people more dependent on
Hmm.
AI, right? So if you look at the big picture, it's all part of that. I think, all the internet, TikTok, all that stuff, all the younger generation, you got to remember they're wired differently. If you study astrology, Gen Z, I have a Gen Z daughter, you know, they were born with Pluto and Sagittarius. It said, they're wild women. I'm a double Sagittarius. They're going to be independent. They need space in the relationship. So right there, Pluto represents the soul in astrology. I still believe it's going to be remoted after being demoted back to being a planet. But yeah, they're wired into this age. They all have Uranus and Aquarius, so they're all wired, to do cell phones and to think that fast. So you have to look at that big evolutionary curve. Now, so yeah, I think women, this is just a movement that's been building and building and building. And unfortunately, because I'm an empath, every time I think about those poor women in Afghanistan who can't even talk in public anymore, I'm going, this really pulls on my heart. Like, how can we be so free? And these women are so imprisoned like that. That's crazy. Like we're living in the dark ages with the present, right?
Yeah,
Co-present.
it's all part of the polarity of kind of what's happening, and it does break my heart to see that there's certain parts of the world where women aren't able to speak up because I think we do bring a lot of perspective, especially in this day and age, that needs to be heard and needs to be seen. But to go back one step as well,
Okay.
because you brought
Yeah.
it up, with each generation, how do the planets dictate each one of the generations and how often do they transit in and out? Because I think that's something people
Uh,
don't really know much of, and
okay.
it does have its influence on every generation, I feel.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I personally work with Pluto, what they call evolutionary astrology works with Pluto as kind of one of the main soul significators. So if you're looking at um, soul levels, the man who, the astrologer wrote the book on this is Jeffrey Wolf Green, and he started evolutionary astrology. So Pluto moves very slowly, although it doesn't always move the same. It doesn't always spend the same time in every sign. Okay. So, for example, like Gen Z is born with Pluto in Sagittarius, right? So that went from 1995 to 2008. Okay. And then the next generation, which we're just finishing, 2008 to 2024, I guess they call those Generation Alpha. They started all over again. Those are born with Pluto in Capricorn. So those are going to be if you want to understand astrology really basically, you just have to think about the four elements. So the four elements are very basic. In the West, we use those four. And astrology works on that basis. So fire, earth, air, water. So you just have to understand the quality of the elements. So if you're born with Pluto representing the soul and also what they call the collective unconscious. So the collective unconscious is what shapes what we're seeing. So AI is a mirror for what's going on in people's souls, kind of abstracted out. Okay, so we are kind of going through this ourselves, ready to jump to the next level of consciousness, right? Um, so if you look at, and it's clearly divined out, like the baby boomers who are never going to get old because they were born with Pluto and Leo, and it is all about them. It's all about me. We're the kings and queens, right? That's the boomers. And I know there's a lot of resentment from from the millennials to the boomers. And then Pluto was in Virgo, and Pluto was in Libra, that was in the early 80s. And, all the divorces kind of came in at that time. Those are millennials, right? Born in the 80s and on, right? So you would say that those are generations. So now the kids that are just being born now from March 23rd, 2023 until 2044, Pluto's going to spend the next 20 years in Aquarius. But, and Pluto's job is to dismantle, destroy, transmute. He's the Lord of death and rebirth and money, wealth. Pluto represents the wealth of the earth, actually. So all of that. So the old structures are being dismantled. Aquarius is a revolutionary sign. Yes, you can expect protests, revolutions, freedom, okay. So fire. So astrology starts with, okay. So right now we're at a very pivotal point. Okay. Saturn is the planet of reality, and most people have heard of their first Saturn return, which you have when you're 28, 29, 30. Again, depending on how fast Saturn is moving or what sign it's moving through, right? Okay. So Saturn is right now at 0 degrees of Aries. It just crossed 0 Aries. That is the first degree of the zodiac. Okay. So again, every 28, it's averaged out to 28 years because Saturn rules reality, it rules the body. There's medical astrology. Every 7 years, your body cells regenerate. So the ancients all knew this intuitively, right? Okay. So 0 Aries point, right? Symbolizes a brand new beginning. Astrology is a symbolic language, right? So, the planets don't make us do anything, although you could say in quantum physics, we are all interconnected in that big quantum field, right? And the planet Neptune, which rules dreams, intuition, creativity, spirituality, is also at 0 Aries. Okay. So that happened earlier this year. They're moving retrograde right now, like all planets do. So the important date is February 20th, 2026. Saturn and Neptune are going to meet at 0 degrees of Aries, and they have never done this before because, of course, we can go back and look at, hey, did this ever happen before? No, it has never happened before. So that to me is the big zero date. So boom, the big bang. So Saturn representing reality and Neptune representing spirituality. You see it's being mirrored if you can read and decipher the signs of the zodiac. So we are
Mhm.
starting a new beginning. Saturn is reality, limitations, time, maturity, history, the patriarchy, Saturn, father time, the grim reaper, they used to call him, right? Um, and Neptune, the planet of dreams. And Neptune rules Pisces, which is the age of Christianity. So there can be a new Saturn is structure, is the architect, and Neptune is all imagination, it's total oneness. So it's almost like, Saturn represents a kind of sense of self and Neptune represents oneness. So it's, you can interpret all of these. You can go on and on and on about what this means, right? Because it's so important. So, yeah, so if you want to understand, I'm going to go back to this elements thing. So fire, the fire signs represent spirit action. They're considered to be outer masculine elements. Earth is feminine. It's yin, it's receptive, right? It's so all the earth signs, so Taurus, Virgo, Capricorn, the air signs, which I mentioned before, so we're dealing with Gemini, Libra, Aquarius, and the water signs, Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces are also feminine. They represent the emotions. Okay, so you just have to think about those ages very briefly. Oh, when Pluto was in earth signs, everybody's going to be very practical. Right? They're going to be attached to their soul needs to come into the physical realm. If you're born with Pluto in a fire sign, it's active, it's spiritual, it's creative, right? Spirit, fire creates, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, this is super interesting, and again, I don't think people know this level of depth of knowledge, and this is where
Yeah, this is really basic. This is 101. This is where you start.
yeah. I mean, for me, even just seeing the synchronicities, because I love to travel and even going to like the Chichen Itza, for example, in Mexico, the way that the Aztecs even built the pyramids. And I remember just being completely blown away by the knowledge. And I knew this from, my love of ancient civilizations from when I was little, learning about Greeks and, Egyptian mythology and whatnot. But there's so much that goes into it because they use the stars to guide them. When you think about the Chichen Itza, it has 4 sides on the pyramid to represent the 4 seasons, and again, the 4 elements. They talked about why there's 52 steps on each one of them because it represents 1 week of the year, because there's 52 weeks within a year. So all of these little synchronicities, come from ancient knowledge, and I think one thing people seem to forget right now in this age that we live in is that there
Mhm.
were multiple generations before us that had all of this ancient wisdom and knowledge. So for anyone that's kind of feeling overwhelmed right now, we've all kind of feel uncertainty, but I'm sure there were multiple points in time in history where people felt uncertain. Out of curiosity, have you looked at where the signs and stars were during the start of the Industrial Revolution, at least within the Western world?
Yeah, I mean, and they just repeated. So, all the astrologers wrote about that. I remember, the alignments of planets that created the Renaissance, which was considered to be an incredibly, creative boom. The planets were aligned there. They have just finished making that alignment. So, of course, astrology is all about prediction, right? And all the kings and all the queens had court astrologers, in every culture, the Buddha when he was born, Siddhartha, he went to the astrologer who said, "Your son is either going to be a king or he's going to totally destroy it all." Um, Queen Elizabeth I had an infamous black magician astrologer named John Dee, who she relied on. And um, sorry, what was your question? I'm kind of going all over the place here.
Oh
Um,
no, my question was, what was sort of the star sign that was ruining or
ah,
ruling the start of the Industrial Revolution?
Okay. Well, I mean, okay. So for the planet Uranus, back to Aquarius, the planet Uranus was discovered in the late 1700s in England by a man named Herschel, right? And him and his sister worked together, actually. And so that was considered, it was the first planet to be discovered with a telescope. So it was the first man made extension of your eye, because up until classical times, and people that are traditional astrologers, that's a different school that's kind of made a resurgence, they only work with the 7, what they call classical planets. And the 7, astrology is embedded into all of our everyday lives, but people don't realize it. So the 7 days of the week are based on those 7 planets, right? So Monday is the moon's day. Tuesday is Mars day. It's more apparent in Latin or Spanish, right? Lundi, Mardi, Tuesday. Wednesday is Mercury, which is actually named off of Woden, which is a Nordic myth. So English is kind of interwoven with Nordic plus Germanic. Do you know what I mean? All kinds of different things. Thursday is Thor's day. If you're a fan of Thor, it's his day. The planet Jupiter. And Friday is Venus's day. And that's why Christians eat fish, because fish is the symbol of Venus. So that's
Huh.
an ancient pagan system that Christians adopted because, you couldn't get people to stop their customs. So Saturday is Saturn's day. You wear black, you eat black foods, you honor Saturn. And Sunday is the sun's day. So they couldn't see. So when they discovered Uranus, oh my God, they didn't know what to do. It was like, we've suddenly gone beyond. There's no limits now. So that's what Uranus represents. Okay, for example. Um, so for example, now that Uranus is at 0 degrees of Gemini, speaking of Geminis, all Geminis for the next Uranus takes 84 years to make a cycle, right?
Mhm.
So every 7 years again. So again, the laws of 7, Uranus and Saturn are synchronized. And if you look at the cycles of the planets, it's all beautifully poetic. It's like you have to believe in God kind of, or some higher intelligence who created this beautiful system that all works together in very long cycles, some 500-year cycles and longer. Um, so Uranus, so the planets, yes, that's what the prediction is all about, the Industrial Revolution. But I want to mention, you were talking about the yugas before. You mentioned you're Hindu, and I know about the
Yes.
different yugas. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a new system. Now, I don't know. I've read about it. Some pundit said, no, there's a mini golden age that is starting this year
Huh.
that they miscalculated. Now, I don't know. I'd have to really do the research. There was some serious astrologer who was promoting this, but of course, they're always promoting the next big thing. You
Yep.
know, the golden age. There's a mini golden age as we're fitting in here starting this year. Now, if you're into human design, which has become very popular, I don't know if you know about human design because it
Yeah, it's part of
synthesizes.
being sustainable studies too, and I think it's,
Ah,
what sustainability for no one that really knows about this. Sustainability is not just a motion about recycling and repeating, but it's also just thinking about human design, human interaction, because we're all here. You think about medical records, for example, and this is the synchronicities that I see in my world and field that I'm working in, you're human. You're going to live on this planet for more than 7 years. Technology is going to keep 7 years of records. But if something happened to you in childhood that may affect you or impact you later on in life, there's no way to recall that data because, again, medical systems are only required legally to store yet 7 years of data. And as someone who has been in and out of hospitals most of her life, I can already tell you that any of my records that were at Sick Kids Hospital do not exist today. So I have no reference of what I was even hospitalized for when I was a kid. And now that I'm in adulthood, I'm, finding new things that's happening in my body. And it would be nice to have that information. So again, when I'm thinking about in healthcare informatics, for example, how do we design a system that benefits the human and the whole human life cycle? Not just what do we need from a technological and legislative standpoint. Same thing goes back to even when you look at real estate. There's great examples already out there of how good design on neighborhoods, parks, your home can actually really impact and increase the quality of life for humans. There's a lot of this aspect, and that's what I love about sustainability. I also ran a hackathon last year where we talked about inclusive design principles, which is working in when you're creating things in technology. Like if you're creating an app, you need to think about how someone's going to use it because we've always used technology in a very linear sense where X equals Y or, A plus B equals C. It's very linear in that sense. And now you're seeing within the tech space, these conversations being brought back around the jobs to be done frameworks, for example. Or in the sense of inclusive design principles, if you're developing a mobile app, let's say for senior citizens to get access to, wheel transit, for example, you have to think about how an elderly person uses an application and make it simple enough for them to benefit from it, but also be able to get live updates on how far the bus is, so that they're not, because, you always see those signs anywhere where they do pick up somewhere and says, oh, we just missed you, call this number. Well, think about how you can build that into your application. What's going to be needed? Do you need to set up SMS? Do you need to set up a automated phone call? These are all aspects of the human design that have to be now brought into technology in order for it to be successful. I think we're all done with seeing the rise and fall of a million and one solutions out there, whether it's personal, B2B, or B2C solutions, and then they just disappear. So the good ones are going to include more human design aspects around it. So, going back full circle here,
okay.
I think we're both good at rambling about these things, but these are the synchronicities that I see around human design in the technology space right now.
Okay, so use the word human design in a different context,
Yeah.
um, but yes, of course, like for example, your records, AI should be able to keep every record, and that's what they're kind of promoting digital ID about, which I don't like. But for that one thing, if it was only used for that, but I don't know, that's not possible really, because once they know all that, they know everything about you.
Hmm.
Um, all your records from birth, everything you ate. I mean, it's going to be diets. At the one point, it's like you won't be able to cheat because the computer is going to say you ate too many calories today, you didn't exercise enough. You know what I mean? If you want to maintain this weight, that's not very far away. So are you going to be controlled so there won't be obese people, so it won't stress the your health and the system and all that stuff? Sure, there are obviously practical benefits for that.
Yeah.
For sure. If it's only used for that, that's what I'm saying. It's a selective tool,
Yeah.
or they used to have augmented reality, which never really took off.
Yeah.
Augmented reality is would be great for like elderly people, right? Mhm.
One of the things that I was curious about, just because I deal with a lot of inflammation myself, just
Mm,
allergies living in North
mhm,
America.
mm,
Unfortunately, when you live in Canada, we are surrounded by trees and pollen. There's no escaping allergies
right,
in this place.
right.
Even if you've never had allergies, you will
Yeah,
develop allergies
Toronto's
here.
infamous for that. I know.
Yeah. And I tell new immigrants or anyone that I know that's new to the country because they're like, I've never sneezed this much before. I was like, well, welcome to this environment. But it puts the focus on sort of regionalized approaches because everybody talks about turmeric being a great anti-inflammatory disease, but does that really work for our environment here?
Mm,
When turmeric works in a hotter climate, it is
right.
amazing. It has very, beneficial properties. But here in North America, I actually went to an indigenous leader who told me that actually try white pine needle tea. That's what
Mm.
our indigenous leaders here actually utilize for inflammation. And I met a girl who was actually diagnosed with osteoporosis quite early on, and she used white pine needle tea to actually manage her inflammation symptoms. And I've utilized it, and I think it's actually been much more helpful to me trying to do turmeric
Well,
lattes.
that's a very important point too, because there was traditionally the 100-mile diet, and I know my husband was into collecting those pine needles and drinking the pine needle tea, and it was really good because it's true. You always use indigenous medicine, which was totally intuitive, right? Like people in India, they call them plant divas. The spirits of the plants would tell you, and it's usually the weeds.
Hmm.
It's usually things that are growing all around you. Nature is benevolent. It's here to help you. The trees are the indigenous, the givers, right? So you would use what grows locally, like for vitamin C, they used that red um, tree that grows in the fall. It's very red. It's one of the first ones, begins with an S. I can't think of the name right now. But they would just steep that, and that would be all the vitamin C. So they never got scurvy. They didn't have, and it's much, if you eat things in natural states, it's much more beneficial. Then you shouldn't use ascorbic acid. It's not really real vitamin C. So I think that's very important too. And also, indigenous people had all this wisdom, so if you can listen to them and ask for their remedies, I think that's much smarter. I think that's a really good point.
Absolutely. It's just amazing to see that all of the sort of collective knowledge and wisdom that was prior to us is making sort of a full circle comeback,
Mhm.
because I do feel like these things are important. And I know as someone who comes from an immigrant household, I was born here, but my parents and I also get into heavy debates about, does this work for us here or does it not? Because
Mm,
the diets that worked for them back home worked in that hot climate. Over here, it's making us all get high cholesterol and high blood pressure, which is not what we want. That's not the
right,
outcome that we're hoping to achieve. So,
right.
even modification in diet over here to sort of adjust for the climate and the environment that we're in, I think is a great way of using AI to kind of power some of that stuff. But Tara, I
Yeah.
do want to thank you for your
All
time
right.
today
Thank
because
you
I know
so
we're coming up
much.
to time.
Okay.
Where can people connect with you, or how can they learn more or reach out?
Okay. So my website at terrataro.com, which is finally being redone. You can reach me through there. I do Zoom readings, I do phone readings, I do workshops as kind of planetary things happen. I work with women's spirituality groups. I teach. So if you want me to come and lecture or teach you about astrology, you want to get a group together, I do that. I do parties, I do events, I do a lot of corporate events as well. So yeah, great.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time again, and tune in for the next episode. Bye,
Okay.
guys.
Thank you.